On a distant world cloaked in violet mist, the human colony of Elysia stood surrounded by ancient forests older than memory. The trees there grew taller than any building on Earth, their trunks wide enough to house small families, their leaves shimmering. With a soft silver glow even in the darkest nights, the air hummed with quiet energy, a kind of song only the oldest among the colonists claimed to hear. Most dismissed it as wind or imagination. But Lila knew better. She lived alone near the edge of the forest in a cabin built from fallen branches and woven vines that seemed to grow tighter around the walls whenever a storm came. The roof never leaked, the floor never cracked, and the door always closed itself. When she stepped out, Lila rarely spoke to anyone in the colony. She came and went like a shadow, trading herbs and strange glowing berries for simple supplies like cloth or oil. She wore a long hooded cloak even in the warmest days and kept her face turned down as if ashamed or afraid, but those who caught a glimpse of her eyes never forgot them. They were pale silver like moonlight on still water and sharp enough to cut through liaise. No one knew where she came from. The colony records listed her as a refugee from a failed deep space transport, but that story never quite fit. She moved too quietly. She understood the land too well, and sometimes when she walked through the trees, the branches bent just slightly out of her way, as if bowing. Few noticed the massive shadow that sometimes moved through the treetops above her cabin. But those who did never spoke of it openly. They told themselves it was a trick of the light, or a large bird. Though no bird on Elysia had wings wide enough to blot out the twin moons for 3 full seconds at a time. The truth was far stranger. Lila was not human, and the shadow was not a bird. Her companion. Kyle slept coiled around the ruins of an old observatory, half buried in moss and stone. The structure had been built by the first human survey team decades ago, but abandoned after strange energy readings scared them off. Now it belonged to the dragon. His scales were deep red like cooled lava with streaks of gold along his spine. His claws could tear through steel, and his breath carried heat that could melt rock, but around Lila he was gentle. He lowered his great head so she could climb onto his back, and he never made a sound when she needed to sleep. They had been together since she was a child, since the day her people fell. The Starlight Elves once ruled 1,000 worlds, their cities floating among the clouds, their songs shaping stars. They were not warriors, but keepers of balance, peace weavers of cosmic harmony. But peace does not stop empires from wanting more, and one by one their worlds were taken until only Lila remained hidden among humans who did not know what she was. Elysia was supposed to be safe, far from the wars that burned across the galaxy. But safety is never guaranteed. The warning came. On a cold morning when the sky turned green for no reason, the colony's sensors picked up an unregistered vessel entering orbit. No hails, no identification, just silence. Then a single message broadcast on all channels: leave or die, within hours. The Krellin warband arrived. They descended in jagged drop pods that tore craters into the earth, their armor black and spiked their weapons, humming with stolen tech. They were mercenaries known across 5 sectors for their brutality and efficiency, hired by corporations or warlords to crush resistance with maximum fear. They did not negotiate. They did not spare. They took what they wanted and burned the rest. Their leader, Commander Vorak, stood at the edge of the main square, his voice like grinding stone. He demanded the colony hand over control of the eastern ridge where rare energy crystals grew naturally in the rock. The crystals pulsed with soft blue light and powered everything in Elysia, from water purifiers to medical bays. But Vorak knew their true value. They were fragments of an ancient power source older than human history and worth more than entire planets on the black market. The colonists argued. Some wanted to fight, others to flee. But Captain Nora Hale, the young defense officer who had trained every able-bodied settler for this exact moment, held her ground. She stood before Vorak with a rifle in hand and fire in her eyes. "We will not give you our home," she said. Vorak laughed, a sound like metal breaking. He raised a hand and his warriors fired into the air, not at people but at the colony's main generator. The explosion sent sparks raining down and plunged half the settlement into darkness. Then he turned and walked away, giving them 1 solar cycle to decide. Panic spread through Elysia. Families packed what they could. Children cried in the streets, but amid the chaos, one figure remained still. Lila stood on the ridge overlooking the forest, her hood down. For once, the wind playing through her long silver hair, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the Krellin campfires now burned. She did not fear them, but she knew what they would do if the crystals were taken. Without the crystals, the land would sicken, the trees would wither, the rivers would turn bitter, and the balance her people had sworn to protect would shatter forever. That night, as the colony prepared barricades and traps, Lila returned to her cabin. She lit no lamp, but the room glowed softly from the runes etched into the walls. She knelt before a small stone altar where a single feather rested beside a scale that shimmered like molten gold. She placed her hand on the scale and whispered words in a language no human tongue could shape. Deep in the forest, something stirred. Kale opened his Aisha's massive form uncoiled slowly, the ground trembling beneath him. He stretched his wings once, twice, sending a gust of warm air through the trees. Then he looked toward the cabin and waited. Lila stepped outside and met his gaze. No words passed. Between them, none were needed. She climbed onto his back, gripping the ridges along his neck, and with a single powerful leap, Kale launched into the sky. They flew low over the treetops, silent as falling leaves. The Krellin sentries never saw them. Coming at the edge of the enemy camp, Lila slid from Kale's back and moved like mist through the shadows. She disabled 2 plasma turrets, with a touch her fingers leaving faint trails of light on the metal. She found the prisoners, the colonists, captured during the initial raid, and freed them with a wave of her hand. The energy cuffs fell away as if they had never been locked. One of the freed men stared at her in awe. "You're the elf they whisper about, aren't you?" Lila did not answer. She only pointed toward the forest. "Go now and do not look back." By dawn, the Krellins were in chaos, their weapons malfunctioning, their comms scrambled, their prisoners gone. Vorak stood in the center of camp, his face twisted in rage. "Who did this?" he roared. Scout approached, trembling. "We saw nothing." "Commander, only a shadow and a woman with silver eyes." Vorak scoffed. "A woman," he spat the word like poison. "The fragile one they told me about, the quiet one in the woods." He laughed. "Then let her come. Let her try to stop us." But Lila was already gone. Returned to her cabin where Kale lay once more coiled around the ruins, his eyes half closed, but watchful in. The colony captain, Nora Hale, heard the rumors. A woman with silver eyes moving like a ghost through the enemy lines. She remembered Lila, the silent traitor who never asked for anything, never caused trouble, who once healed a child's fever with a handful of crushed petals. Nora walked to the edge of the forest that evening and called out softly. Lila. After a long moment, the elf appeared from between 2 ancient trees, her expression unreadable. "You helped us," she said. Lila nodded once. "Why? Because the land asked me?" Nora hesitated, then stepped closer. "They're going to attack at dawn." "They won't. Hold back this time. I know. Will you fight with us?" Lila looked past her toward the distant glow of the Krellin fires, then back at Nora's earnest face. For the first time in years, she spoke more than a few words. "They think I am weak." She said. "They think I am fragile." Nora frowned. "They don't know what you are." "No, they do not. And will you show them?" Lila's eyes gleamed like distant stars. "Yes," she said. Somewhere in the dark, Kyle exhaled a thin stream of smoke curling into the violet sky. The night held its breath, waiting for the storm to come. The Krellins attacked at dawn just as Nora had warned. Their war machines rolled across the plain like metal beasts, spitting fire and thunder. The ground shook with every step, and the air filled with the stench of burning oil and ozone. The colonists fought from behind barricades made of shipping containers and reinforced plating. Their rifles barked in short bursts, but the Krellin armor shrugged off most shots like rain on stone. Within an hour, the outer defenses fell. The eastern gate collapsed. Under the weight of a plasma ram, and Krellin shock troops poured through, screaming war cries that sounded more like animal growls than human speech. They moved fast, brutal, efficient. They did not take prisoners. This time, they burned everything. In their path, Nora shouted orders, her voice hoarse from smoke and shouting. She led a team to hold the medical bunker, but they were pushed back again and again. Her left arm bled from a glancing shot, but she refused to fall back. The colony's last Hope was fading with every passing minute. High on the ridge, Lila watched it all, her hands clenched at her sides. Kale lay beside her, his tail twitching, his eyes fixed on the chaos below. He could feel her pain, her anger, her fear, but also her resolve. She was not ready yet, not fully, but the time was coming as the sun climbed higher. The Krellans reached the central square. They planted their black banner on the roof of the comms tower and began rounding up survivors, men, women, children, all forced. To kneel in the dust under the watchful eyes of armored guards, Vorak stood at the center. Arms crossed, a cruel smile on his face. He had one or so he thought. That night the storm came not from the sky but from the forest. Dark clouds gathered, though. The stars still shone, and a low hum filled the air like 1,000 voices singing just below. Hearing the Krellans grew uneasy. Their sensors flickered, their weapons overheated for no reason. Some claimed they saw figures moving between the trees. Pale and silent with eyes like stars, Vorak dismissed it as fear nonsense. He barked, "They are broken, they will not fight again." But he was wrong. While the Krellans celebrated their victory with stolen rations and loud boasts, Lila and Kale moved like shadows through the camp. They did not kill, they did not rage. They struck with precision and silence. Lila disabled the main power relay with a single touch, her fingers leaving behind faint silver marks that pulsed once, then faded. Kyle landed on the roof of the command tent, his claws tearing through the reinforced fabric without a sound. He breathed a thin stream of heat, just enough to melt the control panels inside, but not enough to start a fire. Then they freed the prisoners again. This time it was harder. The Krellans had doubled the guards, but Lila knew the land better than they ever could. She led the captives through hidden paths known only to the oldest trees' roots that formed natural tunnels beneath the earth streams that ran backward during certain moon phases, places where sound did not carry, and light bent strangely. Nora was among them, her arm wrapped in a makeshift sling, her face streaked with dirt and blood. When she saw Lila waiting at the edge of the forest, she almost wept. "You came back." Lila nodded. "We are not done." By morning the Krellans were furious. 2 war machines disabled, 36 prisoners gone, and no sign of how it happened. Vorak paced like a caged beast, his pride wounded more than his forces. His second-in-command suggested they leave, find another target. But Vorak would not be mocked by ghosts. She called for silence, then stepped onto a broken hover platform, his voice booming across the camp. "I challenge the silver-eyed one to face me, in single combat if she is real. Let her prove it. If she wins, we leave. If I win, she dies, and the rest of you become slaves." The colonists heard the challenge through cracked comms and whispered radios. They looked to Nora, who looked to the ridge, where Lila stood watching the wind lifting strands of her hair around her face. "You do not have to do this," Nora said when she found her later. "That day, he is a monster. He has killed hundreds." Lila turned her silver eyes toward the camp. "I know." Then, "Why? Because he called me fragile." Nora did not understand at first, but then she saw it. Not pride, not anger, but something deeper. A quiet fury that burned colder than fire. Lila was not just defending the colony. She was defending what her people had always stood for, the idea that gentleness is not weakness, that silence is not fear, that the smallest light can blind the darkest eye. The duel was set for noon in the crater, left by a fallen Krellan dropship. The ground still warm, the metal edges twisted like broken bones. The entire colony and the entire warband gathered around the rim, some to watch, some to mourn, some to hope. Vorak arrived first, clad in heavy battle armor reinforced with scavenged plating from a dozen worlds, his fists wrapped in energy coils that crackled with every movement. He flexed his fingers and grinned. The crowd held its breath. Then Lila appeared. She walked alone from the tree line. No armor, no weapon, no cloak. Just a simple tunic, barefoot on the scorched earth, her hair loose, her eyes calm. She stopped 10 paces from Vorak and waited. The Krellan laughed so loud it echoed off the crater walls. "You came, you really came," he said. "You must be even dumber than you look." Lila said nothing. Vorak charged without warning, his massive frame a blur of muscle and metal. He swung a fist that could crush a skull like an egg. The crowd gasped. But Lila did not move until the last possible second. Then she stepped aside just enough, and touched his chest with one finger. Pulse of light erupted from her palm, not bright, not loud, but deep like the heartbeat of a star. It passed through Vorak's armor, his skin, his bones, and for a single moment he froze, his eyes wide, his mouth open in silent shock. Then he flew backward. As if struck by an invisible hammer, he crashed through a metal barrier 20 meters away, rolled twice, and lay still. Silence, then a single cheer from the colony. Then another. Then a roar that shook the trees. Vorak was dragged back by his own warriors, unconscious, blood trickling from his nose. His armor cracked down the center where her finger had touched. Lila turned and walked away, without looking back. But her face was not triumphant. It was grim because she knew this was not the end. The Krellans would not accept defeat from someone they called fragile. They would send someone worse, someone who knew what she truly was, and that someone was already on his wayfare above in orbit. A larger ship detached from the shadows, its hull scarred with ancient battles, its engines silent as death aboard it, stood Draxus, the warlord of the Krellan fleet. A legend, even among killers, he had crushed rebellions on 100 worlds and collected the bones of mystics as trophies. He had heard the report of a silver-eyed elf on Elysia, and his blood ran cold with recognition. The Starlight Elves, he had been hunting their remnants for decades, and now he had found the last one. He gave the order, "Prepare the dreadnought. We descend at dusk." On the ridge, Lila felt the shift in the air. The song of the land grew tense. Worried, she looked up at the sky where the stars seemed to dim one by one. Kale landed beside her, his wings folding with a soft thud. He lowered his head and nuzzled her shoulder gently. She placed a hand on his snout and whispered, "We must be ready, somewhere in the colony." Nora gathered the remaining fighters. They had won a battle, but not the war, and they all knew it. The real storm was just beginning. The silence after Vorak's defeat lasted less than a day. By dusk, the sky darkened. Not with clouds, but with something far worse. A massive ship descended from orbit, its shape jagged and cruel like a broken fang, its hull scarred with old battles and glowing with stolen energy. It blotted out the twin moons and cast a shadow so deep it felt like night had swallowed the world whole. The colonists froze in place. Even those who had cheered just hours before now stood in stunned fear. They had never seen a vessel like this, not in stories, not in nightmares. This was a dreadnought, a war engine built to erase cities and break worlds from its belly. A single figure emerged, not in a drop pod, not with an army, but alone. He stepped onto the scorched earth as if the ground owed him respect. His armor was not metal, but something older, fused bone and black, crystal etched with runes that pulsed like slow heartbeats. His face was hidden beneath a horned helm, but his eyes glowed faint red like dying embers, and when he spoke, his voice did not echo. It sank into the earth like a curse. "I am Draxus," he said, "and I have come for the last Starlight Elf." The name sent a ripple through the crowd. Some had heard it in old tales whispered by traders from the outer rim. Others had seen it carved into ruins on dead worlds. Draxus was not just a warlord, he was a hunter of mystics, a destroyer of ancient bloodlines. He collected relics not for power but for vengeance. Lila stood on the ridge, her hands at her sides, her breath steady but her heart heavy. She had hoped never to hear that name again. Draxus turned his gaze toward her, and for the first time in years she felt seen, not as a woman, not as a ghost, but as what she truly was, the last of her kind. "You carry the skyfire," he said, his voice low now, almost gentle but laced with venom. "Your ancestors stole it from my people. They sealed it away in crystals like cowards and fled into the stars." Lila did not deny it. She could not. The skyfire was the core energy of her race, a gift from the first. Stars meant to heal, not to harm, but others had twisted its purpose, turned it into a weapon, and in the chaos her people had hidden it, scattered across the galaxy in places only they could find. Elysia was one of those places. The crystal beneath the colony was not just a power source, it was a seed, a sliver of the original skyfire, waiting for the right hand to awaken it, and Draxus wanted it. They raised a hand, and his elite guard appeared from the shadows, not ordinary Krellans, but cybernetic hunters, their bodies half machine, half flesh, their eyes replaced with glowing lenses that saw through lies, through magic, through fear. They moved without sound, their weapons humming with anti-mystic fields designed to drain elven energy on contact. Lila knew she could not face them all at once, not here, not now, but she did not have toast. Draxus advanced. The ground trembled, not from his steps, but from something deeper. Kale roared from the forest, his wings spreading wide, his body wreathed in heat and light. He launched into the sky, drawing every weapon In the camp toward him, plasma bolts streaked after him, but he twisted through the air, like smoke diving, then climbing, then vanishing. Into the cloud cover in the chaos, Lila turned to Nora, who had gathered a small group of fighters near the eastern trench. "Follow me," she said. They moved fast through hidden paths only she knew, winding through root tunnels and overgrown ruins. The land itself seemed to guide them, opening gaps in the underbrush, closing them behind. The air grew cooler, the deeper they went, until they reached a stone door covered in moss and old carvings. Lila placed her palm on the center rune, and the door slid open silently, revealing a staircase that spiraled down into darkness. "This is the heart of Elysia," she said. "The crystal chamber." Nora hesitated, but only for a moment. Then she nodded and led her team inside. Below the surface, the walls glowed with soft blue veins. The same energy that powered the colony pulsed, stronger here, thrumming like a living thing. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, its floor smooth as glass. In the center rose a pedestal of black stone, and on it rested the Skyfire crystal, no bigger than a human heart, but brighter than the sun. It floated just above the stone, humming with ancient power. Lila approached it slowly, her fingers trembling, not from fear, but from memory. She had not touched Skyfire since she was a child, since the day her mother placed a shard in her hands and whispered, "Remember who you are." But before she could reach it, the ground shook again. Draxus stood in the doorway. "How quaint," he said, stepping inside, his hunters fanning out behind him. "You led me right to it." Lila turned to face him, her back to the crystal. "You will not take it," she said. "I already have," he replied with a flick of his wrist. One of his hunters threw a device onto the pedestal, a shard of black crystal that hissed like a snake. The moment it touched the Skyfire, the blue light dimmed and a wave of cold spread through the chamber. Lila gasped as if struck. The runes on her skin flickered and faded. She fell to one knee, her strength draining away. Draxus smiled. "You see, your magic is nothing against true power." Nora raised her rifle, but before she could fire, a hunter lunged, knocking the weapon aside. Another grabbed her arms, pinning her against the wall. Lila tried to stand, but her limbs felt heavy like stone. Draxus walked toward the pedestal, his hand outstretched, but then a sound echoed from above, a deep guttural roar, followed by the crash of falling rockhail. The dragon had broken free from the plasma nets that held him. His wings torn but still strong, he crashed through the ceiling of the chamber, sending debris raining down. The hunters scattered as fire bloomed in the air. In the confusion, Lila forced herself up. She crawled toward the pedestal, her fingers reaching for the Skyfire. Draxus turned and snarled. He kicked her away, but she rolled and came up fast, her hand brushing the black shard. The moment she touched it, pain shot through her body, but also clarity. The shard was corrupted, yes, but it was still Skyfire, and Skyfire answered to her blood. She whispered a single word in the old tongue light. The chamber exploded with brilliance, not blinding but pure. The black shard cracked, then shattered. The hunters screamed as their cybernetics overloaded, sparks flying from their joints. They collapsed one by one, twitching, and still Draxus staggered back, his armor smoking his red eyes wide with shock. "You cannot win," he growled. "I do not need to win," Lila said, rising to her feet, her silver eyes blazing. "You only think in terms of force, but we were never about force. We were about balance." She raised her hands, and the chamber answered. Vines shot from the walls, wrapping around Draxus's limbs. The floor opened slightly beneath his feet, roots coiling around his boots. Echoes of elven warriors appeared in the air, not real, but strong enough to push him back toward the exit. Nora and her team recovered quickly. They grabbed weapons from fallen hunters and formed a line behind Liligo. She said to them, "Get the colonists to the deep shelters. This is not over." Nora hesitated, then nodded. She knew better than to argue as they fled. Lila turned back to Draxus, who was breaking free of the vines, his face twisted in rage. "You delay the inevitable," he spat. "Perhaps," she said, "but delay is all I need above them." Kale roared again, his voice shaking. The stone, and somewhere far away in the galaxy, the other hidden Skyfire seeds began to pulse as if waking. The war was changing, and Lila was no longer hiding. The colony emptied fast under Nora's command. Families moved through underground tunnels that led to the old geothermal shelters built during the first settlement days. The air inside was warm and thick with the smell of damp stone, but safe. The walls were lined with emergency rations and water purifiers, and for the first time in days, people dared to hope. Above ground, Lila stood alone in the crystal chamber. The Skyfire pulsed steady once more. The black shard gone. The chamber humming with renewed strength. She knew Draxus would return. He was wounded, not broken, and his pride would not let him leave without the Skyfire. Or her head. Kale rested near the broken ceiling, his breathing slow, his wounds steaming faintly in the cool air. Lila knelt beside him and placed a hand on his snout, her fingers glowing softly as she channeled what little energy she had left into his body. The dragon's eyes fluttered open, and he nudged her gently, as if to say, "I am fine." But they both knew it. Was a lie outside the Krellin camp was in chaos without Vorik and with Draxus missing. The chain of command had fractured. Some warriors wanted to retreat, others to burn the whole forest to the ground, but none dared enter the ruins again, not after what they had seen. Lila used the quiet to prepare. She walked the chamber's edge, tracing the ancient runes with her fingertips, each mark a memory, a warning, a promise. Her people had left these not just to guard the skyfire, but to guide the last, one who would come, the final guardian. She found the central glyph hidden beneath a layer of moss, the symbol of convergence, where skyfire met earthfire, where dragon met elf, where balance could be restored or shattered. She did not know if she was strong enough, but she had no choice. Meanwhile, Draxus sat in the remains of his command tent, his armor cracked, his left arm hanging useless, the cybernetic veins in his neck flickering with unstable energy. He stared at the forest, his mind racing. He had underestimated her. He had thought her weak like the others he had hunted, but she was different. She did not fight to kill. She fought to protect, and that made her far more dangerous. He activated a hidden comm unit built into his wrist, a signal that reached beyond Elysia, beyond the sector, into the void where his true masters waited. "The relic is here," he said. "The last elf is alive." A voice answered, cold and ancient. "We are coming. Do not fail us again." The line went dead. Draxus knew he had one. Chance left the rose despite the pain and summoned his remaining hunters. Not the cybernetic ones, those were gone, but the old ones, the ones who remembered the blood wars, the ones who feared nothing. They gathered in silence, their faces scarred, their eyes empty of mercy. "We go into the heart," he told them, "and we do not come out until it is done." Back in the chamber, Lila felt the shift in the air. The song of the land grew tense again, sharp like broken glass. She turned to Kale and nodded. "It is time." She activated the old defenses, not with force but with song. A low hum that rose from her chest and filled the chamber. The walls responded, vines shot from the floor, coiling like serpents. The ceiling dripped liquid light that hardened into barriers. The floor shifted, forming trenches and spikes. The air itself grew thick, resisting movement. Then she stepped into the center and waited. The first hunter came through the main entrance, fast and silent, but the vines caught him mid-leap, dragging him into the shadows. The second tried to climb the wall, but the liquid light burned his hands. He fell screaming. Draxus came last. He did not rush. He walked slowly, his eyes fixed on Lila, his expression unreadable. "You have made this harder than it needed to be," he said. "You made it hard when you came here," she replied. He raised his right hand, and from his palm a new weapon emerged. Not plasma, not steel, but a blade of twisted skyfire, black and jagged. It pulsed with stolen energy and made the air around. It where Plila's breath caught. That blade was made from a fallen elf's core. A desecration. "You took her life," she whispered. "I took her power," he said. "And I will take your—" She lunged. Lila dodged, but the blade cut through the air like a storm tearing. Through her defenses, the vines withered on contact. The light barriers shattered. The chamber groaned as if in pain. Kale tried to rise, but his wounds held him down. He roared in frustration, smoke curling from his jaws. Lila moved fast, weaving between attacks, her bare feet silent on the stone. She knew she could not match his strength, but she did not need to. She only needed to hold him long enough. Outside, the sky darkened again, not with clouds, but with ships, dozens of them descending in a wide circle around the forest. The true masters had arrived. Nora saw them from the shelter's monitor. Her blood ran cold. They were not Krellin. They were something older, something worse. Their hulls shaped like thorns, their engines silent, their weapons unknown. "We have to warn her," she said. But there was no way out. The tunnels were sealed, the surface swarming with enemies. Back in the chamber, Draxus pressed his advantage. He swung the black blade in wide arcs, forcing Lila back toward the pedestal. She stumbled once, her hand grazing the skyfire for just a second. In that moment she saw it. Not just the crystal, but the connection. the thread that linked it to every other seed across the stars, and they were all waking. She smiled. Draxus saw it and hesitated. That was his mistake. Lila dropped to her knees and pressed both palms to the floor. "Awaken," she whispered. The chamber exploded with light, not from the sky fire but from the earth itself. The roots beneath the stone surged upward, wrapping around Draxus's legs, his arms, his throat. The black blade fell from his hand and shattered on the floor. He struggled, but the roots held firm, fed by the combined will of every hidden seed, every sleeping guardian, every lost voice crying out for balance. Kyle rose with a final roar, his wings spreading wide, his body glowing with renewed fire. Above them, the first enemy ship opened fire, but the forest answered, trees bent and twisted, forming living shields. The ground opened, swallowing drop pods whole. The air filled with a song so old it made metal weep. Lila stood and faced Draxus one last time. "You thought power was taking," she said, "but true. Power is giving." She placed a hand on his chest, not to strike, but to heal. His eyes widened as the corruption in his body unraveled. The cybernetics fell away. The stolen skyfire returned to the earth. For the first time in centuries, Draxus felt clean. Then he collapsed. The chamber fell silent. Outside, the enemy fleet hovered uncertain, their weapons useless against a world that fought back. As Lila turned to Kale and climbed onto his back. "We finish this together," she said, and with a mighty leap, the dragon burst through the ceiling into the violet sky, ready to face what came next. The sky burned with enemy fire, but the forest below burned brighter. Vines lashed upward like living whips. Roots tore through metal hulls, and the air itself shimmered with a barrier of pure starlight, woven from the awakened skyfire seeds across the galaxy. The planet was no longer just a colony. It was a living weapon, and Lila was its voice. Kale soared above the chaos, his wings trailing embers, his roar shaking the clouds below him. The enemy ships fired again and again, but their weapons sparked and died against the shield Lila had raised with a single thought. She sat tall on his back, her silver hair streaming behind her, her eyes closed, not in fear, but in focus. She was listening to the song of the world and adding her own note. To it, Draxus's masters watched from their command vessel, their faces hidden behind masks of polished bone. They had come for a relic, they had come for power, but what they found was something they could not understand, a force that did not obey laws of physics or war, but of balance, of harmony, of life itself. One of them spoke in a voice like dry leaves, "We cannot break it." Another replied, "Then we erase it all." They activated the core weapon, a device capable of collapsing a planet's core into a black shard. A final solution they had used on a dozen worlds before. But as the weapon charged, the ground beneath their ships began to glow. Not red, not orange, but silver. The same light that lived in Lila's eyes. The same light that had once filled the halls of the Starlight Elves. The forest was not just defending itself, it was remembering, and memory is the strongest magic of all. Lila opened her eyes and raised her hands. Not in attack, but in offering. She did not destroy the weapon, she unmade it. The energy reversed, flowing back into the earth, feeding the roots, feeding the trees, feeding the skyfire, until the enemy ships began to crumble. Not from damage, but from age, their metal rusting in seconds, their circuits turning to dust, their crews screaming as their own bodies aged decades in moments. The command vessel tried to flee, but the vines caught it, wrapping around its thrusters, pulling it down like a drowning beast. Kale circled once, then landed gently near the colony's edge where Nora and the others watched in stunned silence. Lila slid from his back, her feet touching the scorched earth. One last time. "It is done," she said. Nora ran to her, tears in her eyes. "You saved us." Lila shook her head. "No, the land saved itself. I only reminded it." How she turned to Kale and placed a hand on his snout. The dragon lowered his head and rumbled softly. They both knew what came next. The skyfire was safe, but the balance was still fragile. Other seeds slept on other worlds. Other hunters would come. The war was not over. It never truly ended. It only changed shape. Nora understood. She did not ask Lila to stay that night. As the colonists began to rebuild, Lila and Kale stood at the edge of the forest one last time, the twin moons casting Long shadows across the land, the air smelled of rain and new growth. Then they were gone. No sound, no flash, just absence. The next morning, Nora found a single silver feather and a scale that shimmered like molten gold on her doorstep. She held them in her hands and smiled. Far above the clouds, Kale flew higher than ever before, his wings catching currents no human ship could reach. Lila sat between his shoulders, her eyes closed, her face calm. The stars ahead pulsed with familiar warmth. Somewhere, beyond the rim of known space, another forest waited, another crystal slept, another world needed a guardian. And the last starlight elf answered the call. The humans of Elysia would tell stories of her for generations. They would speak of the fragile woman who moved like wind, who touched a warrior and sent him flying, who stood against an armada with nothing but a song and a dragon at her side. They would name their children after her. Not with grand titles, but with quiet respect, and in the deepest parts of the galaxy where ancient things still stirred in the dark, they would whisper a new warning. Beware the gentle ones, for they carry the stars in their hands.